Hello and welcome to my garage. In this video we'll be taking a look at the braking system on an MGB. We'll be covering both the front and the rear brakes, so what I'll do is I'll add some bookmarks at the bottom of this video so that you can skip on to the part that you require. To start with though, we're going to be looking at the front brakes, so let's take a look at the parts we might need. I would say tool wise there's nothing that special we need. We've got a torque wrench for doing the calipers back up. And also we've got this 1 1/8 socket there, which is for the hub retaining nut. We've also got a 9/16. We need two sockets for this. This is to remove the brake calipers from the hubs. Other bits, we've got two new brake calipers here. I ended up, I was going to reuse the calipers on the car, but their condition wasn't great, and the driver's side was actually a bit seized up. Which I have rebuilt that caliper, but for the sake of it, I've decided to fit these two new ones. Cost of these was just £80 for the pair, so that sort of works out just as well, not very much more expensive than refurbishing yourself. Certainly if you're paying to have them plated, it's probably going to cost more than just buying the brand new ones. You'll have to excuse me, unfortunately we've got quite bad weather here at the moment. You might be able to hear the hail in the background of the video, so sorry if that's sort of being picked up on this microphone. We've also got a brand new set of brake clips there, always worth keeping these in stock. I would say to put these on every time you change the brake pads. We've got the locking tabs there for the calipers. I did buy a brake seal kit here. Obviously won't be using that now because we've got the new calipers. Brake hoses, I would say if your hoses are 10 years old, I would definitely change them no matter what condition they look like they're in. I've got the braided hose in my car. The ones on there are only 3 years old, so hopefully I'll be reusing the ones I've got. I've also got some stainless steel pistons. These will be going into the new brake calipers. They just come with a mild steel piston. And if you look in the link below, this will show you the video I made recently covering the refurbishment and putting the seals into the calipers. We've also got brand new disc and pads. So these are just a standard non-ventilated rotor. These are a Brembo rotor, not particularly expensive. They come from OP Oils. I think off the top of my head they're around about £24. I would say quality-wise, the Brembo ones are a little bit better than the classic gold ones from Moss. And then we've got some brake pads here. These are Hawk sort of racing specific brake pads. So these will still work when these discs are red hot. I would say there's no point buying sort of race pads for a normal road car. You're probably not going to get them up into their operating window, and their performance probably won't be as good as just a normal set of road rated brake pads. And then finally we've just got the brake fluid here from OP Oils. This is the Motul 660. In terms of when to look at changing a brake disc, you will see that on the disc itself you usually have a sort of a minimum thickness. If I hope I can get it into focus here. Yeah, so you can see the minimum thickness on these is 7.6 millimeters. So as soon as the brake is less than, so as soon as the brake disc is less than that, it will need to be changed. Also, if you've got sort of heavy scoring or you've got quite a pronounced edge on them, I think it's worth swapping them out. The brakes themselves are fairly cheap. So looking at the discs on the car, the thickness of them is actually fine, but we've got quite a lot of bad grazing going on here. I'm guessing that's mainly from sort of the high temperatures that these brakes reach. Also a little bit of scoring, but certainly nothing major. But as I'm doing the pads and these discs, I think are about sort of 4 years old now, so it seems sensible to swap them out. And with regards to the brake pads themselves, I would say as soon as you're sort of 5 millimeters or under left on them, it's a good time to swap them. Obviously you can run them for a little bit further than that, but I find you can often lose sort of a couple of millimeters on these pads over a race weekend. So it's sensible to get them swapped before they get down to the metal. So it's a good opportunity while we're here to take a look at these braided hoses too. I would say if you see any damage at all on these, to swap them. The trouble with the braided ones is you can't sort of see if there's damage in the hose underneath, so it can be one of those parts that can fail suddenly, and I have heard that happen in the past, certainly with older hoses. So I definitely wouldn't take the risk on these, and as soon as they're 10 years old I would swap them. Before I remove the calipers from the car and start working on the braking system, I find it can be useful to put a sort of a bag or just a bit of clear plastic underneath the master cylinder cap here. That just sort of hopefully seals the system up and stops quite so much brake fluid falling out when we look at these calipers. So we've got both front wheels up in the air now. It does make that just a little bit easier, so you can turn the sort of steering from side to side to get a bit better access at the back here. So let's get started on the job. So to start off with, let's get the old brake pads out of the caliper. So we just Squeeze these split pins back together. You should just pull out with a bit of luck. There's one. And then the second one as well. Take these, hopefully just slide the brake. So we've managed to get both these brake pads off. You can see on this side too, the wear is a little bit uneven, so it's probably a good idea to rebuild this caliper, or in this case I will be replacing them. So that would be, this was the sort of inside one, so it would probably be that inside piston that's sticking a little bit. I'm just going to give it a feel. So it is a little bit stiff, but as we'll sort of get this off and have a proper look at it. To remove the top part of the brake hose, we use a 1/2 inch spanner underneath that's onto the hose here, and then a 9/16 one on top, and that should hopefully loosen this top part. Just be careful that this nut at the top isn't getting sort of caught up on the copper pipe here. I think with this one it looks like it's coming up fine. So we will lose a bit of brake fluid here as this comes off. I've got a drip tray just underneath there to catch that as it falls. Now to remove the second part of the fitting, we'll use our 1/2 inch spanner again underneath, and then we'll use a 9/16 on this nut that secures that line in place. Obviously just be careful not to damage the copper fitting as we undo it. So that's that top nut nearly free now, and then we can just lift that and put it to the side. Moving back around to the top of the brake caliper, we can just use our 1/2 inch spanner just to loosen this hose off here, and then we can slowly, just carefully unwind this. Try not to sort of let any fluid or too much fluid spill out to the other end as we do it. Just remove this from the car. Just going to move my grip tray a tiny bit to catch anything that might fall. There we go. Now to remove the actual caliper, we've got these sort of locking tabs that hold the two securing bolts in place, one at the top, one at the bottom. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a chisel and just open both these tabs back up, and we will be replacing this locking tab part as part of the process. So it's unfortunately not the easiest to show you, but hopefully you might just get an idea from the camera. I'm just going to tap both of these locking tabs out. With the tabs bent back, we've got a 5/8 socket just to remove these. Now that they're loose, I'll just use a normal ratchet to remove them. With both of those securing bolts out, this brake caliper can now drop away from the car. If you weren't changing the caliper, there's no reason you couldn't leave the hose connected and just hook the caliper up when you remove it, so as not to put pressure on the hose. With our brake caliper totally out of the way, we can now look at this. We can now look at the hub assembly. So we just got a chisel again, just really carefully. I like to do this without bending the grease cap if we can. So just work around it gently. Just sort of prise it off side to side. Okay, and that's just dropped away now. And then you'll see under here now we've basically got a split pin going through the end of the hub, of the hub there, and that's secured on with this 1 1/8 nut. So the first thing we need to do is to draw this split pin out. Let's see if we can pull that out the top now. It's a little bit tight for space, but it's a little bit tight for space. But you do get even, unfortunately, even less space with the wire wheel cars, because this assembly is further back down inside the hub. So let's see if we can push this. Can't quite get it free just yet. There we are, so that's the split pin out. Before I remove this hub assembly, I was looking at some of John Twist's videos on MGBs. I noticed he had a little trick for checking the end float in the hub. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give this nut a bit of a pinch as hard as I can, and then just going to see if that's tightening up on the hub or not, and how much movement we got there. So there's a tiny little bit of end float in there. I think you're aiming for, I think, between 20 and 40 thou. If it's a bit tight, you add shims in, and if it's a bit loose, you remove the shims. I would say that's exceptionally close to how I'd like it, though. And maybe we take out one of the very thinnest shims when we reassemble, though. Now we can loosen this end nut right off. So it's this 1 1/8 socket. This will just come off. I do find a magnet tool is useful here to collect this end washer first of all. And then I like to remove the shims from the bearing as well, so I can take a look and see exactly what we've got in there. So that's the bearing, and we've got no shims on that side. I can see one here. You don't want to damage these as you remove them. So we've got one shim. There's another one. And then a couple extra there. So I'll keep those shims together. And as I said, we might remove one of the very thinnest ones when we reassemble. So that, I think, is now all of the shims out. So I'm going to take the whole hub assembly out as one thing. There we go. You might be wondering what that little part there is. That's just a wheel speed sensor for the electronic speedometer in my car. So we've got our wheel hub on the bench in the vise here. This is where we need the two 9/16 sockets. So I've got a long breaker bar on the back holding the top of the bolt, and then we'll use a ratchet this side to undo the nut. And what I'll do, I'll go around and get all 4 of these loosened off. So we've got all four of the nuts removed, and we should be able to now just get the bolts back out of the hub. They've got spring washers on them as well, so they can just get be a little bit tight in places. Try not to lose these spring washers. And that hub will just lift away from the brake, and then we're left with the old brake disc there that we'll be disposing of. Let's give you another look at it now. Now we've got it off the car, and you can see the sort of the crazing on it, hopefully in the shot there. A little bit of bluing as well, not really surprising because of the temperatures they reach. But I'd say overall pretty happy with how they've worn. It's really just the crazing on the surface. It's just got me a little bit concerned. I don't think it affects them greatly, but I thought while we're on the job, for the sake of sort of £30 for a set of discs, we'll swap them out. So there's our brand new disc in the vise, ready for reassembly. I've given the hub a quick clean up. I'm just going to paint a little bit of this the usual aluminium anti-seize I use just around this inside edge here, just to make sure that doesn't get sort of stuck in over time. In fairness, I think there's a little bit of a gap there anyway, so hopefully it shouldn't do. There we go. Just give that a slight smear around. And with this, it just goes back together the same way we took it apart, really. So that will just slide in, and you'll sort of see the 4 holes and how they locate. So we've got our bolts to go back through, going through the back, and then tightened up on the front. And what I will do with the bolts as well is just paint a little bit of the aluminium anti-seize on these as well. If I just get one of these just on gently, that will just stop it all falling apart. So I'll go around now and get all four of these nuts and bolts started. So I've got all 4 of the nuts and bolts back in. They're just sort of finger tight at the moment. So I'm going to go around and just sort of pull them up a little bit by the ratchet, and then we'll torque them up to finish. Pull them up too much just at the moment. Just to make sure all 4 get seated nicely, and I'll go from side to side, sort of even it out. That's all 4 pinched up. The torque given for these bolts is 40 to 45 foot-pounds, so I'll use 60 Newton meters just to tighten these up. I think that's the spring washer just clicking there. No, that's it, that's got it. So again, we'll just move across the wheel to spread the go. And then 60 on the last one there. So that's all 4 of those tightened up now. So we're back down on the car again now, and I've got the hub ready to go back. I've packed a tiny bit of grease into the bearing before putting it back. So let's slide this on. So just gonna slide this back on. And as I said, I'm gonna try it. I'm going to try it with one less of the one fewer of the spacers in it. So I just want the absolute thinnest one. So try it with one of these little shims missed out this time, just to see how that sits. So there's our bearing to go back in. Again, I'll pack a little bit of grease on this before it goes back. So there's our bearing in and home, and then we've got this keyed washer next. Sits on there, and then we've got the securing nut. So I'm going to pinch this end nut up to 70 Newton meters, and then we'll give it a feel just to see how it's sitting. So I'll just do it by hand first. Let's see if we can put 70 Newton meters on this. So let's just see how that's spinning now. So that's pretty nice. We just got to feel. There's a tiny bit of float on that, which I think is probably about where we need it to be. So let's just see if we've got a split pin hole that looks. I think if I just give it a little bit more of a tweak, we can get this. We can get that cross split pin in. So let me just put a tiny little bit on there. So we've got this nut lined up with a convenient hole. Hopefully we should be able to just push this this split pin back in, if it will. It's a little bit tight because it just touches on the top of the hub just there. And what I'll do is have to start turning that out so we can get it. We can get this all the way in. Hopefully just a pair of pliers now will be enough to pull that in and just get these turned and back in on themselves. So now with our split pin in place, we should be able to push our sort of dust bearing grease cap back on. So let's just give that a little tap. There we go. So now we can put our new brake caliper into place. So we'll get our fixing bolts first of all. We've got a new one of these lock tabs to hold it all in place. So I'll pop that first one through. I like to use a little bit of anti-seize on these. I mean, you could use a thread locker instead, but I think as long as they're torqued correctly, there's no reason why these should come loose, especially as we've got the lock tab on there too. So let me get the first one in place. I'm sorry if I'm going to be right in the way of the camera here. So that's the top one, and then let me get the bottom one started as well. Again, with these, quite an important bolt, so we want to make absolutely certain they go in nicely and they are torqued correctly at the end of the job. So that's sort of finger tight now. I'm just going to have just a double check, make sure we haven't sort of missed anything. I'll give this I will give the hub a bit of a spin to make sure we're not catching the caliper anywhere. Got a nice sort of gap, a nice even gap side to side there as well. So that's all looking pretty good. So I'll give these a pinch up now with the torque wrench. So it's 40 to 45 foot-pounds on these. I'm going to go for 60 newton meters on this wrench. So let's give these a pinch up. Just do the little bottom one a little bit to make sure they pinch up nice and even. So sorry again, apologies if I'm right in the way of the camera. That's the bottom one. Just do the same with the top. There we go. And then the final thing is to turn over the locking tab at the top and bottom. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't sort of turn these over and film at the same time, so you can just see the two tabs there and there. All I use is just a sort of metal punch there. Just give that a little tap with a hammer to get the flat to get it against one of the flats on the bolt there. I've taken a look at the brake hose and I can't see any damage on it at all, and it's only a couple of years old, so I think I'm going to reuse this one. I will put a new copper sealing washer on it though. So let's we start off fitting this into the brake caliper part first. So just take the cover off and then just carefully screw that part in. So there we go. And now this end I will pinch this end up tight. There we go. Now we can join it back up to the fitting on the car. So we'll take this nut back off. Stiff washer stays underneath. Let's just tuck that back inside there, and I'm just going to put this nut on really loosely. I'm just going to move it through its range of motion just to make sure there's no kinks in the hose, or if there are, it usually sort of winds them out as it goes through its range of motion. So there we are. I'm very happy with how that's moving now. So let's do this. Let's tighten the top knot up first. So again, it's a half inch underneath, and then a 9/16 on top. So just a gentle pinch on that. It's only to hold that hose in place. And with that bottom one tight, we'll pop this the top one back in. Just be careful as you do it. Just to again make sure you don't catch the copper pipe as you put it back in, and also make sure it goes back on squarely. So again with this, I want a firmish push, but not too much, because you can end up damaging the copper pipe if you do it too much. So I'm just gonna, I'll probably just leave it at that for now. Obviously we've got to bleed this whole system, and I will come and give these a check once we've done that. We can now put our brake pads back in. So I'm just going to put a tiny little smear of the aluminium anti-seize on the back of these, just a tiny little bit along the edges. So that's our first one. Should just slot back in, because obviously the pistons are right back inside the caliper at the moment. So again, just a little bit of a smear on the back, and then just a tiny bit down the edge. You want to avoid getting it onto the actual friction material if we can. So let's see if we can slide that in. So that's going nice. And also, just obviously the first time these brakes have been fitted, so just make absolutely certain they're sort of looking like they're lining up properly. I mean, you should hopefully see that they're sort of covering most of the disc as the swept area. So let's see if we can get the clips on these now. What I will do, I'm just going to lightly put this bottom one through without the spring in place. I only do that just to stop these sort of falling out as we're working. So with the clip, I think they go with the longest tangs pointing towards the centre. So let's sort of see if we can get him just clipped up there. I think the bottoms need to pull up. There we go. Bottoms need to pull out a little bit, and then that should just push in like so. So yeah, that all looks like it's gone in pretty well. Let's do the same with the bottom ones now. So again, longest bit pointing towards the sort of centre, and then again I think we just want to push those round a little bit. There we go. Hopefully we can get a split pin in. I would say if you're having trouble getting the split pins in, it usually means that the pads haven't located quite properly. So I would sort of take a look and just see if there's something going wrong if you can't get these pins through. So let's give these a little turn around, and just as usual give that a little pull down. The same, oops, and then the same with that one. So that's all looking pretty good. See, that's just the hub, the brake that's just touching on those pads a tiny bit. But I think overall I'm happy with that, and we can now progress on to the other side. So I'm round working on the driver's side of the car now, and I can't say I'm not totally happy with this wheel bearing. It sort of rolls free enough, but it does just seem a little bit noisy. So I'm going to get this hub back off again, and swap the wheel bearing out. There we are. So we've got our wheel hub back on the bench now. So I'm just going to lift out the bearing. This sort of plastic seal needs to come out first of all. That should just sort of lever up and out with a bit of luck. There we go. That will allow us to take out the rear part of the bearing, which is the slightly larger taper, and then we'll have a spacer tube down here in the middle that's got to come out as well. And then hopefully you'll be able to see down in the front of the bearing there. You might see you've got the sort of little notched holes. Let me see if I can point that out with a punch. So you've got a notched hole down here and one the other side, and we're going to use the punch now to tap the wheel bearing out. But I think what I will do, I'm going to put a bit of wood under here, and I'll support the what I'll do, I'm going to support the hub on a piece of wood, because I don't really want to be pushing down onto those studs if I can help it. So let me just see if I might just sort of balance there. So again, we're just going to get our punch and just give these a little tap, and they usually come out pretty easily. I think that's the front one now all the way out. So we're going to turn it over, and we'll do exactly the same again with the rears. So you've got those two little sort of slots to get the punch into. And then the other one will pop out as well. When you're refitting them, obviously you want to make sure that the sort of wider end goes in first. You can't sort of mistake it, because obviously you need to know that you can get it out again, and the taper would go in that way up. Now with this, the wheel hub out of the way, it does give us just a quick opportunity to show how the bearing arrangement works. So you've got the larger tapered roller at the back, you've got the spacer tube. In this little gap here is where the shims would be. Then this is the front tapered roller, the slotted washer, and then the nut. So basically, when you're adding shims into here, you're making this gap wider, so it's going to slacken up the wheel, if anything. And then if it gets too loose, you remove the shims to make this tighter. I hope that gives you a little idea as to how that the bearing system works. So now we can put our bearings back into the hub assembly. So we've got the smaller one here, and as we said, it goes in with the thick end goes in first, and you'll see you've got the two slots that allow you to push it out again later. So make sure you do it that way round. I tend to just use a sort of a socket, because you want to make sure you spread the force over this bearing as best you can. Obviously you can use a punch, but you do run the risk of sort of damaging that if you sort of catch it badly. So let me just I'm going to drop that in. I'm going to hopefully just use a soft hammer to tap this home, so it might make a bit of a noise on the table, but let's just see how this goes in. So that's dropping down quite nicely. There we go. Then you hear how the sound changes when you hit the bottom. So we'll turn this over now. And again, I need to just find a little support so that we're not hammering onto the studs there. So let me just pop this. So I've turned the hub over and I found a smaller piece of wood to support in. I'll drop the distance tube in next. I think if you do forget to do it, as long as you do it before you put the rubber cap on the top, it will still go back in. And then we've got our second part of the bearing. This is the large one that goes to the back. Same as the front one. This goes in with a thick end first. It should just hopefully drop down a little bit. And then I'm going to get again. I don't know if that's going to be. I'll just see if this. Found a sort of a socket here. It might be about the right size. So I'm just going to try tapping it. Again, you can hear how the hammer note changes as that locates. So I think we're. So I'm happy that that's now sat. That's now sat all the way down into the channel. So next we've got our bearings to go back in. I like to really try and work the grease into these. So I'm just going to put a bit on with the screwdriver first, and I'll just use my fingers to really. I really like to try and get as much into this sort of inner face as we can to make sure that that's really well packed with grease. unfortunately doing it where it does mean you rub some of it off. It looks like that's kind of gone down into that middle section there, the inside. So let me just pack a bit more on the outside, and that will just drop back into the top there, and just give that a spin around again, just to work that grease in a bit. I'll give it one more top up as well. There we go. We've got our seal to go back on this on the inside face. Now with this you've got a little lip there that goes that way up, so you've got the flat side sort of facing you, and then the lip side goes down into the hub. Again, this should just push into place. I might just want to just really gently, it's just a soft hammer again, just to tap that in. There we are. So that's all the way in now. Just as we did with the slightly larger bearing, we'll pack plenty of grease onto the outside one as well. This is the smaller of the tapers, and again we just like to try and get as much grease forced into this bearing as I can. Trying to get it so you can see it going all the way through. And now we should be ready to put this whole hub assembly back onto the car. I'm going to try refitting the hub onto the car now. So we've got our distance tube bits already in there. I'm going to use the same number of shims as came off, just to sort of see what happens with that to start off with. So we've got the shims are in, then we've got our brand new bearing. I've greased this already. So that's gone home. And then the end washer, and then the castellated nut just to finish. So I'm not going to torque this at the moment. I'm just going to give it a pull and just sort of see if I can get an idea as to how it's sort of feeling. So let me just give that a tweak there. Let's just see. So it's not bad. I think it's a little bit too much, just a tiny bit too much slack in that, I think. So I think I'll certainly take out one of the spaces as to start off with. Probably go with one of the thinnest ones. So again, I like to use this magnet tool on the shims. It just means we don't sort of lose any of them, and they can get caught on the threads of this sort of. That looks like the sort of shim. That's a very thin shim, so I'm going to try leaving that one off. I'll put that one back in that fell out, and then wheel bearing, just push that home just to make sure, as we said, that the shims aren't getting caught. Tab washer, then the castellated nut again. So again, I'm not going to torque it, just sort of give it a pull up to see how it's sort of feeling. Oops. Let's just bring that back. Now, so I'm happy with that. So what I'll do now, I'm just going to loosen that nut just a touch. Then we can put the correct torque on it, which I'm going to go with 70 Newton meters. I think off the top of my head it's something like 40 to 60 foot-pounds, and obviously you can just adjust it very slightly once it's in place. So here we are. That's 70 Newton meters on the torque wrench there, just to give this a pull up. Let's just see where that sits. Okay. Very close to the hole at the top, so I'm just going to put a tiny bit more torque onto the fitting with this bar. I'm still well within the guidelines for what's permitted, so it should be no problem just to turn that just a tiny bit more. Then that should line up perfectly with the split pin. There we go, and there's our split pin back into place. So our brake caliper's now back onto the car, and I should just mention before I put the hose back on, obviously it is possible to mix these two holes up, but as a rule of thumb the brake bleed nipple should always be at the top so it's expelling the air, and then the brake hose just goes onto the fitting down there. So now we've got the brake pads back in and the hose back on the driver's side, and that's it for the front of the car for now. We can now turn our attention to the rear brakes. On an MGB you have a drum brake system on the rear of the car. These usually wear out slower than a disc brakes do at the front, but it's still worth getting the drums off every now and again to check them and check the linings as well. For working on the rear brakes, one part you'll definitely need is one of these special brakes pans. That's a square, you see it has a square fitting there that goes onto the handbrake adjuster. We've also got a few replacement springs here. I'm going to take a look at the wheel cylinders on the rear of my car. I've been doing a little bit of experimenting with different size bores. Usually in sort of MGB racing we tend to go as small as we can with the bore on these to sort of push as much pressure as we can to the front. I have been noticing my front tyres are locking up a bit, so I'm going to try this, which I think from the top of my head is a 5/8 bore diameter on that wheel cylinder. Before we start working on the rear braking system, we've got our sort of clear plastic bag in place over the top of the master cylinder cap. This just stops that fluid leaking out, the same as it did with the front brakes. So the rear of the car is jacked up and supported on axle stands, so we can take the wheel off. And what I'm going to do is use the special square spanner to loosen the brake adjuster on the back. I'm going to loosen the adjuster until it's all the way back out, and that will mean that the brake drum rotates nice and smoothly. We've then got these two posi drive screws on here. On your car you may find you have 4 bolts instead if you've got 4 nuts instead if you've got a wire wheel axle. So let's take those 2 out. You can see the drum is already sort of coming away, and then we can lift the drum off like that. So now we can see the rear brakes with the drum removed. This is the little adjuster part at the top that we wound back out, and then you can see where the drum springs sit. Quite an important one is the one just here. That sits under the sort of handbrake arm. There's a little bit of surface thrust here on the brake linings. I don't think that should be any issue at all. You see on them there's plenty of sort of thickness on them still, so there shouldn't be any issue in reusing these. I'm going to give the whole area just a quick clean down now before we proceed to the next step. So this is just normal sort of disc and clutch cleaner. Just sort of give this area a spray, just a quick sort of brush off just before we sort of strip it all down. It's got a grip tray underneath to catch the worst of the mess. I like to remove the handbrake cable adjuster before I start working on the brakes. It's more important when you're sort of setting to do this, but I'll do this sort of at the start just to make life a little bit easier. So that's out of the way. If you're having problems with your rear brakes, there's a couple of bits that are sort of common failures on these cars. The first of which is these the wheel cylinders here leaking. The easiest way to sort of check that is if you just take a screwdriver and carefully just lever back that rubber seal. This should all be nice and dry in here. If it's not, then you want to swap the cylinder out. I think you can rebuild them, but it's just generally not worth it. It's easy just to swap them. I'm just going to check the other side too to make sure that both seals are good, which I think they are. That's all nice and dry in there. And usually you would see that on the inside of the rear wheel. If you've got brake fluid around there, that would show that one of the rear wheel cylinder is leaking. Secondly, we just want to make sure this is all nice and free. So I've just got a sort of a pry bar here, and we're just going to push. You can just see the lever pushing these linings side to side, and we can see that wheel cylinder is free on both sides. So I think we can assume this wheel cylinder is fine, but I will be replacing it anyway for a slightly wider bore one. Now we can begin to remove the brake lining. So let's get these little clips off first of all. So I've just got a pair of water pump pliers, and I just got to give these it's a quarter turn to free them off from the pin. I think there is a special tool you could buy to do it, but I do find those slip joint pliers work pretty well. So let's just take take these two off. I just put a finger on the back to hold that in place, and then it's just that quarter turn. Hopefully I'm not blocking the camera too much with this. Unfortunately, there we go. Yeah, so just that quarter turn, and then both those clips will drop out. And now we can look at removing the springs. It can be a good idea if you've not sort of done these brakes before, to get a sort of a paint marker. If you've got 2 or 3 different colours, that's ideal. You can just put a dot, sort of a dot on the spring and a dot on the hole that it goes through, because they do have a special orientation, these brake linings. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove this lower spring first of all, which basically holds the handbrake. That holds a handbrake assembly in place. I'm trying to do this without getting in the way of the camera. There we go. So that just comes unclipped first of all. And then with the top one, because we've wound this adjuster all the way out, we might find we can just lift these drums away now. And that's that spring dropped out. So let me just collect that. So that's the top spring, and then this should hopefully, yep, that just will lift over. And then that all has come free. We've already removed that handbrake lever, so this whole assembly now should come off. I'm going to replace these rubber boots. They never seem to last. That's the whole assembly can come off. You can see here the rubber boot has started to perish quite badly, so I'll be replaced now. I mean, it's one of these bits. It's only a couple of years old. They just don't seem to wear particularly well. And then you can see there that is our assembly fully removed from the back plate. We did have a few comments last week after the video I did showing how to remove this rear wheel cylinder on the bench. It was a lot harder under the car, so I thought I'd put my money where my mouth was and do it in situ today. So to start off with, we've got the bleed nipple. I'm going to remove that altogether. And I've got a tray in place just to catch any leaks. Come away. We've then got the brake copper line going into it there. So let's just see. Just really careful with these. If it doesn't want to go, you really don't want to damage this copper part there. So that should just unwind nice and gently and just come out. And I will just see if we can just unhook the. Just loosen the line there and get it out of the way. So now we're going to see if we can remove this. Let's see if we can remove the clip. So that's the clip off, and then we can just carefully remove the brake cylinder. I've just had to elongate this hole very slightly to get the replacement wheel cylinder in. It's a different size to the standard one. It's still a little bit smaller than what's meant to go on the car, but just a little bit bigger than the one that was on there previously. So the wheel cylinder is now ready to fit. Let's sort of clip it in from the front first. Again, I've removed the bleed nipple from it, so that just sits in there nicely. Now let's see how we get on. So we've got a brand new clip for the back. So the technique is just the same as before. We've got our, hopefully you'll be able to see, I've got my little screwdriver, and that's just to lever this over. Let me just get that the right way around. Hopefully now I can get that screwdriver in. almost there. Oops. That's now got it locked in. So in fairness, yes, a little bit harder under the car, but still certainly possible with just a screwdriver, as we've proved there. So now with our wheel cylinder in place, we can put our line fitting back on. So just careful not to cross thread this, because it can be easy. So you always just finger tight first. And then just a 7/16 spanner. Pinch that up. So again with these fittings, just a gentle squeeze should be all you need. And when we come around and bleed this, we will be checking to make sure we've got no leaks. Next on the car, we've got the bleed nipple. This should just screw back into place. Oh, it's finger tight first. And then we'll just give that a pinch with our 7mm. Again, not too tight. You will notice possibly I've reused the old bleed nipple for this one, because that's a titanium one that won't rust. So we have our wheel cylinder back into position. Before we reassemble this, what I like to do, I do like to put just a little bit of grease on this handbrake adjuster at the top. So let me just give these two little barrels a quick clean down. And what I'm going to do is a little bit of the anti-seize. This is just going to go onto the thread at the back. Unfortunately, these are notorious for seizing in place, and then they break when you try and loosen them. And then what I will do, just a sort of very standard. This is a wheel bearing grease, but any sort of grease would do. It doesn't have to be anything too specific. So I'll just paint a little bit on there, on these end bits too, which is where the adjuster will be going, and then sit them back in. And when they go back in, you notice they do have a sort of a slanted surface that needs to go sort of that way on, so that the brake adjuster is going against the brake adjuster is going against that slant there. So let me just demonstrate again. So a little bit of grease, and then this longest side is facing me as that goes back in. Next, we can put our handbrake adjuster in, and this is, just want to make sure this is nice and loose, the part here. That just sort of goes back in the same way it came out. So we'll be facing that way. This sort of hook goes inside, and then this should just sit against there. And then once we've got the drums in, that will hold things in place a bit more. I just want to add in something very quickly here. While working on the other side, I have found it's an awful lot easier to get this rubber gaiter part installed as soon as you've put the sort of the handbrake mechanism into the brake there. So with the drums, they do have a way around. At the moment, the front of the car is this way, and so you want the leading edge of the drum the same way that the wheel will be turning. So the leading edge is there, and obviously the drum will be coming around that way. So that leading edge is here, and then the second leading edge will be here. I have given the springs a bit of a check over, so hopefully we can just reuse these again. I'm going to drop this bottom one in first. So we're going through the round hole on that side, and then also the round hole on that side. And now we should hopefully just be able to drop this into position. You've got the handbrake there, so that's going to come that side of it. Let's see, there's pistons just the long way around. Apologies again if I'm getting in the way of the camera. Unfortunately, it's not the easiest to do with the camera still running. So let me get that there. This needs to come. bottom one in. Our two are set at the top, and then if we look here, we can just see this. The spring that comes through here has got this sort of extension bit on it, and that goes underneath that little handbrake arm there, and then the other side goes through the round hole. We can now look at the top spring, and again we've got two round holes. You've got a little slotted hole there, but we don't use that one, and we just want to try and make sure we orientate the spring so it just sits. That's it, that way up. So that sits nicely away from the adjuster there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hook it in one side first, and then try and hook it in the other side too, and then just pop that back in, and hopefully do the same with that side. So that has, yeah, that's all gone back in nicely. I'll just show you the close up of that. You can just see we're using the two round holes at the top. The third spring goes through the sort of the handbrake arm here. So this we're going to need a pair of pliers for. This might look a little bit different. This is the one for the banjo axle. It does look a little bit different to the one in your possibly in the Salisbury car, depending on which one you have. So for this, I tend to get a pair of pliers and hopefully just stretch that enough to pop back in, if it will. So that, I'm just going to show you again. Here we are. I just want to show you there how that bottom spring sits across the handbrake mechanism. We can now get our sort of securing or anti-rattle clips back into place. So if we just sort of get the drum roughly where it needs to be. Sorry, get the line roughly where it needs to be. Then we've got our sort of slip joint or water pump pliers again. Hold that. Just hold your finger on the back is usually enough just to hold that in place. Make sure you make a note of the orientation, because you'll need to twist this once it goes back on. So that should just push on. There we go. And that's that one in place. So that lower one did put up a little bit of a fight there, but we managed to get both of those clips home now. So we can now look at fitting our drum back to the car. We've given this inside a bit of a clean up. There's a little bit of rust on there, but that's sort of absolutely nothing to worry about at all. We had no sort of deep grooves and certainly no sort of edge building up here. And when I checked the diameter, we're still well within the tolerance. So this should just hopefully slide back on. There we go. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to put these two screws back in, so we know that's all nice and tight now. With the drums back on, we can now adjust the brake shoes out using the same adjuster at the top. Again, we've got the square spanner, and this time we'll be going clockwise to tighten these up. You will feel as you turn this, there's a sort of a flat every quarter turn that that screw will go onto. And what I like to do is, as I'm turning it, I like to just pull the handbrake lever on every now and again, just to make sure that those drums are nice and centered. We'll keep turning this clockwise and just feel until the drum starts getting just that little bit stiff. Still a way off yet, so it's just starting to get a little bit stiffer now. Have to forgive that noise. Unfortunately, the central drive shaft isn't connected, so that is banging around just a little bit. So I can feel that the adjuster is starting to get a little bit tighter now. In fact, that feels like it's probably one more. Yeah, and that's now locked on. So let's come back one. That's sort of loosened up. I'm going to go back one more. I just do that for racing purposes. Otherwise, you can find these sort of pump up a bit when they get a bit hot. We can connect our little clevis pin here for the handbrake. Sometimes some cars you might use a split pin. I quite like these R clips. They seem to work pretty well. And that will just push back on like that. There we go. And that's now this side. This is the passenger side now done. So I'm going to move around and do exactly the same job on the driver's side. I just wanted to show you this very briefly, just to give you an example of how these brakes can go on the wrong way around. If you look here, we can see the wheel will be turning around this way. So this brake lining is the right way up, but this one isn't. But they will still fit. They will still fit back together the wrong way up. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to switch the camera back off again, and I'll turn this one the right way around. There we are. That should be a lot better. You can see now we've got the leading edges coming the right way where the drum will turn. So that's the other side, the driver's side now, all back together on the car. If you feel that the handbrake lever is moving a bit too far, you can always set that with the sort of the barrel adjuster that's on the lever itself. So the final part of the job now will be bleeding the entire brake system. So obviously we've put some new rear cylinders on the back there. We've also replaced the front calipers too. So it's very important to make sure there's no air left in the system. I already have a video on this on my channel, so rather than going through it all again in this video, I'm going to add a link below in the text. It'll just show you how to find that video. We also wanted to give a mention and a few special thanks to a few other people on YouTube. We've got Steve Denton, who lives just down the road from me. We've been doing a little bit of work, not recently, but a couple of years back before the whole COVID thing took off. But hopefully Steve will be doing a few more videos soon. We also wanted to mention Matt Brailsford, who's in the US, and he's been doing he's been building his channel really well. We've been doing a few sort of online cinemas on Sunday evenings, so if any of you are interested in that, again I'm going to put a link to Matt's channel below. And finally, I'd really like to thank Caleb, who's been mentioning me on his Built Official channel, again over there in the States. He's building a very unique MGB GT with a lot of custom parts and a lot of his own fabrication on it, so I'd definitely say his channel is well worth a watch. As always, with any questions on this, don't hesitate to get in touch if there's anything you'd like me to go over again. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Many thanks. Bye.